The US economic crisis wasn't a single shock, but a structural breakdown. Behind the markets and policy debates lies an architecture built on leverage, inequality, and political paralysis. As the foundation weakens and the pillars come under pressure, the system sustains itself with temporary solutions, masking deeper cracks that threaten long-term stability and social cohesion. Watch this entire video to understand this better. The camera pans over a desolate trading floor after hours, where the flickering screens cast a cold, rhythmic light on empty chairs. This is the silence that precedes a tectonic shift in the global order. We are accustomed to thinking of economic collapse as a sudden, unpredictable event, a bolt from the blue. But systemic failure is rarely a surprise to the architecture that houses it. It is a feature of the design. We begin our investigation not with a crash, but with a structural flaw. For decades, the global financial system has been built on a foundation of increasing complexity, where debt is layered upon debt, and risk is hidden behind sophisticated mathematical models. This is the architecture of collapse. It is a world where the butterfly effect is no longer a metaphor, but a daily reality of the interlinked markets. A default in a distant emerging economy, or a sudden freeze in the repo market, can send shockwaves through the entire edifice of global capital. As we look into the dark heart of the machine, we see that the very mechanisms intended to provide stability have become the conductors of contagion. The question is no longer if the system will fail, but how much of our world it will take down with it when the load-bearing pillars of liquidity and trust finally give way to the relentless pressure of reality. The signs of crisis do not appear as a grand explosion, but as a series of subtle, persistent tremors in the global plumbing. We see it in the dryness of the markets, a sudden evaporation of liquidity where buyers vanish and bid-ask spreads widen to impossible margins. Economic indicators begin to flash yellow. The yield curve inverts, a historic harbinger of recession. While credit default swaps CDS for major financial institutions start to tick upward, reflecting a quiet fear that the too big to fail are more vulnerable than they appear. In the real economy, the signs are found in the stalling of global trade and the sudden volatility of exchange rates. We see the canary in the coal mine in the commercial real estate sector, where empty glass towers stand as monuments to a debt-fueled era that is no longer sustainable. When the cost of servicing debt exceeds the growth of the underlying asset, the architecture begins to groan. For the average person, the sign is the sudden difficulty in obtaining credit, or the realization that the bank has quietly tightened its lending standards. These are the precursors of systemic failure, the moment when the friction in the machine becomes heat, and the heat begins to melt the very gears that keep the global economy turning in its delicate, precarious orbit. The mechanisms of economic shocks in a systemic collapse are defined by the speed of contagion. In a hyper-connected world, a localized failure, a bursting property bubble in a regional power, or a currency crisis in a middle-income nation is transmitted instantly through the nervous system of global finance. This is the domino effect driven by margin calls and cross-collateralization. When one asset class falls, investors are forced to sell their winners to cover losses elsewhere, leading to a synchronized collapse across unrelated markets. We see the liquidity trap emerge, where even if central banks slash interest rates, the money fails to reach the productive economy because the banks are too terrified to lend. The shock is often amplified by algorithmic trading, where machines react to price drops in milliseconds, creating a feedback loop of selling that no human can interrupt. This mechanical failure is further exacerbated by the sudden stop of capital flows. Like a heart attack in the body politic, the flow of credit, the blood of commerce simply ceases. This is the moment when the architecture of collapse proves its lethality. It turns a manageable fire into a global conflagration by ensuring that no part of the system is truly insulated from the failures of another, transforming a single point of weakness into a total systemic blackout. Global case studies illustrate the recurring nature of this architecture. The 1997 IMF crisis in Asia serves as a blueprint, where hot money fled as quickly as it arrived, leaving once prosperous nations like Thailand and South Korea in a state of sudden, violent austerity. In Argentina, we see the results of a decapitated currency, where the link between the peso and the dollar broke, vaporizing the life savings of the middle class and leading to a society where trust in the state has never fully recovered. Greece's decade of depression highlights the debtor's prison of a shared currency, where the architecture of the euro prevented the nation from devaluing its way to competitiveness, forcing a brutal internal collapse. Even the recent turmoil in Turkey and the total disintegration of the Venezuelan economy show what happens when the systemic failure is driven by the erosion of institutional independence. These are not merely foreign tragedies. They are mirror images of the fragility inherent in our own systems. They show that when the liquidity dries up and the exchange rates spiral out of control, the sophisticated financial instruments used by the elite provide no protection for the worker on the street. Each case is a chapter in a larger book of warnings, proving that no nation, regardless of its history, is immune to the laws of mathematics and the consequences of structural rot. Within the United States, the impact of systemic failure is felt as a profound institutional disillusionment. The American economy, once a beacon of productive industry, has become an inverted pyramid of financial services. When the architecture fails here, it strikes at the heart of the American dream, the belief in predictable progress. We see the impact in the hollowing out of regional banks and the volatility of the 401, which has replaced the stable pension as the primary vehicle for retirement. For the individual, the failure is personal. It is the mortgage that goes underwater, the small business loan that is suddenly called in, and the realization that the social safety net is riddled with holes. The US. Economy's reliance on the dollar's reserve status provides a temporary cushion, but it also creates a Triffin dilemma, where the need to supply the world with liquidity leads to persistent domestic deficits. As the real estate market becomes a playground for institutional capital, the average citizen is squeezed between rising costs and stagnating opportunities. Systemic failure in America doesn't always look like a breadline. Sometimes it looks like a generation of young people who can no longer afford to start families or buy homes. A quiet, demographic collapse that is just as devastating to the nation's future as a sudden stock market crash. The responses from governments and central banks have increasingly become part of the very architecture of collapse they seek to fix. In the face of systemic tremors, the default reaction is to provide infinite liquidity, a flood of newly minted currency designed to grease the wheels of the financial system. While this prevents a total freeze, it creates a moral hazard where the biggest risk takers are the ones most likely to be bailed out. We see the rise of fiscal dominance, where the central bank is forced to keep interest rates artificially low to prevent the government's own debt from becoming unserviceable. This creates a zombie economy, where unproductive companies are kept alive by cheap credit, preventing the creative destruction necessary for genuine growth. When the government does act, it is often through austerity for the many and subsidies for the few, further eroding the social contract. The use of quantitative easing has inflated asset prices to the point where they are detached from reality, leaving the system even more vulnerable to the next shock. These responses are the band-aids on a crumbling dam. They provide a temporary sense of security while ensuring that when the eventual failure occurs, it will be larger, more complex, and far more difficult to contain than the one that preceded it. Personal survival in a time of systemic failure requires a radical departure from business as usual. In a world where the architecture is collapsing, the most valuable assets are those that are uncorrelated to the central system. This means diversifying away from a purely digital or financial existence. One must consider real assets, tangible goods, land, and skills that retain value regardless of the stock market's performance. Financial literacy must evolve into systemic literacy, understanding the flow of liquidity and the risks of counterparty failure. For the individual, survival is about resilience over efficiency. While the global system is built for maximum efficiency, a resilient life is built with redundancy. This includes reducing reliance on high-interest debt, maintaining a portion of savings outside of the traditional banking system, and investing in local networks of trade and mutual aid. The useful insight for the viewer is that when the large-scale systems fail, the local becomes the primary site of survival. By shortening your supply chains, both for your food and your finances, you insulate yourself from the butterfly effects of global contagion. True security is found in the ability to function when the grid of global finance goes dark, turning the architecture of collapse from a threat into a landscape that you have prepared to navigate with clarity and purpose. We conclude with a remarkable message of structural renewal. Systemic failure is not the end of the world, but it is the end of a specific way of organizing the world. The architecture of collapse is built on the hubris of thinking that risk can be eliminated through complexity. But as we have seen, true stability comes from simplicity, transparency, and a return to the productive economy. The crisis is a cleansing fire that reveals what is essential and what is merely a financial illusion. The lesson for the viewer is that while you cannot control the central bank or the global bond market, you can control your own architecture of resilience. We are entering a period where the individual's ability to adapt, to innovate, and to build community will be more valuable than any paper wealth. The systemic failures of the past have always led to a great reimagining, where new systems are built on the ruins of the old systems that are more decentralized, more human scale, and more grounded in reality. The ghost of the old system is fading, and in its place is the opportunity to build a foundation that is not designed to collapse, but to endure. The future belongs not to those who tried to preserve the crumbling towers, but to those who were brave enough to build something new on the ground. As the dust of the systemic failure begins to settle, we observe the rebirth of the tangible. The era of financialization, where money was made from money in an endless loop of speculation, gives way to an era where value is once again tied to utility. We see this in the shift toward local manufacturing, the resurgence of trade schools, and the growing interest in sustainable agriculture. The impact on a person's life during this transition is a shift in perspective, from a consumer of global products to a creator of local value. This is the psychological antidote to systemic failure. When the large-scale architecture proves itself untrustworthy, people turn back to the things they can see, touch, and influence. The exchange rates that matter most become the ones between neighbors, the exchange of help, the exchange of trust, and the exchange of real goods. The insight for the viewer is that wealth is being redefined. It is no longer just a balance in a bank account that could be frozen or devalued, but the strength of your social capital and the robustness of your physical infrastructure. This part of the journey is about finding the solid ground beneath the shifting sands of the financial system and realizing that the most resilient architecture is the one we build together, brick by brick, in the real world. We stand at the final threshold of our investigation into the architecture of collapse. We have seen how the pursuit of infinite growth on a finite planet, fueled by an ever-expanding mountain of debt, leads inevitably to the systemic failure we now face. But as the camera pulls back, we see that the collapse of the old system is the necessary fertilizer for the new. The remarkable closing message is that the failure is not an indictment of our potential, but an indictment of our previous choices. We have the knowledge to build a system that rewards labor over speculation, that values the environment as a primary asset, and that ensures liquidity serves the many rather than the few. The signs of crisis were the labor pains of a new era. Your role in this transformation is to be an active participant in the redesign. Whether it is through supporting local economies, demanding fiscal transparency, or simply becoming self-reliant, you are the architect of the next system. The documentary ends not with a screen going black, but with a horizon glowing with the possibility of a world built on integrity rather than illusion. The architecture of the future is in your hands. Build it to last. Build it for the people. Build it with the hard-won wisdom that when the system fails, the human spirit remains the only asset that is truly too big to fail.